The Alachine were far more broad than tall, with leafy branches arching out in all directions, twisting and interlacing to form an intricate environmental system within the dense canopy. Much like the creatures that lived there, to the aspiring youth of Reisenbow, the canopy was home. The ground sheltered by the great arching branches of the Alachine grew less of the tall grasses of the open plains, allowing for the more leafy specimens to flourish. Known as the Shaded Fields, this terrain was the preferred hunting ground of the Divide. Reisenbow stood along a small, crescent-shaped ridge nestled at the base of the Alachine, its many structures silhouetted against the trunks of the great fruit trees. The branches of the arching trees provided shade from the heat of summer and shelter from the bitter cold that swept the plains in winter, as these gentle guardians did not shed their broad leaves with the coming of fall. The ridge itself was littered with ferns and decaying materials fallen from the massive vegetation, the soil beneath rich and dark. The rounded huts were topped with light-colored wooden shingles cut from the bark of the Alachine. Scattered along the ridge, the huts blended with the natural decor constructed of stone and mortar. Each dwelling complemented the earthy colors of the gully. Snug between two ridges in the center of the village was an open area, reserved for fire circles and social festivities that often lasted well into the night hours. The dark-colored stone and the greens of moss and lichen provided natural beauty in that cool place that smelled of earth and fire. This was Reisenbow, my home. We were simple in our ways, even for the era. While other civilizations had flourished into crude cities elsewhere, our people elected to live in ways that differed greatly from their forefathers. They had witnessed firsthand the corruption of civil progress and the destructive powers of greed, as it had inevitably turned an entire tribe of their brothers against them. These were the tales I heard most as a child, warnings of the nature of greed and the virtues of awareness and unity, lessons I took to heart, as did every child huddled around the warmth of the fire to hear what stories might be told each evening. The history of the tribe was passed in this way, to the aged voices of the elders. By day they usually did little more than watch over the youngest children of Reisenbow while their parents tended the needs of the day. The watchful elders provided care, entertaining the young with stories of epic journeys and battles passed down over the generations. Their stories were tales of adventure, teachings of bravery, courage, and endurance. Fueled by the exciting world promised by the words of the elders, children grew all the more eager to find adventures of their own. Almost as soon as a child learned to walk in Reisenbow, they ran through the foliage with their others. The elders did little to intervene aside from keeping the peace when necessary. It was a respected role and one I greatly looked forward to filling in my late years, though many others most certainly did not. The youth of Reisenbow were called wildlings for good reason. Even the beasts of the land seemed more willing to engage one of our brawny hunters than a frazzled wildling pup. When the children were old enough, they would spend less time with the elders by day and join their parents stalking the fields or working the crops along the river. However, the elders would ever remain the warm centers of wisdom, their value growing all the more precious as their days passed. No matter how full I was from the matters of the day, my evenings belonged to the fire circle of my kin. My father was not one for telling stories, as he said very little in his later years. Yet he was always there next to his father, much as I sat next to him. What was left of my closest elders sat adjacent to us, and their living children around them. With the dark of nightfall came the warm light of the circle, and the members of the circle spoke openly about all things mentionable. Once conversation began to subside, stories were shared, whether newly told or retold for yet another time around the circle. Stories were always told best around the fire, it seemed. Or perhaps that was due to my interest in the more foreboding tales. Nothing was more exciting to me as a young wildling than hearing the tales of a mighty warrior and the dreaded beast they faced, like the Trickler, a creature most dreaded. The Trickler was a worrisome creature. It had a long serpentine body of armored segments, carried by a legion of soulless marching legs. At each of the terminal ends of its body was a pair of long tendrils that waved and reached through the air, as if groping for the very souls of men. The tendrils at the lead end were slightly larger, and beneath their junction to the body was a gruesome set of jaws, fed by a ruthless pair of razor-sharp talons opposed to form a wicked vice which no armor could withstand. This creature meant death. The Trickler had been a nightmare for the village, much before my time. Once it began feeding on our people, it seemed reluctant to stop. It started by attacking groups of hunters, but once it found the village, matters grew worse. According to the stories, it killed nearly a dozen before it was stopped. Blades, axes, and arrows were useless against the thing. Injuring the Trickler was not only difficult, but foolish as it turned out. When wounded, the creature thrashed about wildly, with immense speed and strength, turning to deliver its vengeance through toxic evisceration. It killed only what it intended to devour, and it devoured most entirely. It did not take long for the Trickler to grow bold enough to enter the village once its ferocious appetite developed. The elders elected to relocate the inhabitants to sanctuary on Mount Iraq until the creature was vanquished, leaving a small band of Devi's strongest to confront the beast upon its inevitable return. When they first settled the area, my ancestors took residence within a series of small caves high on the mountain. Thus, over time, the summit was made into a refuge for our people. They would not risk another disaster like that of Haslan-Da. Iraq's peak rose high above Reisenbow, obscured by the forest. Located just south of Reisenbow Center was a pass between two great trunks of the Alachine. The rich, fragrant soil of the well-trodden path was smooth and dark, contrasting with the light-colored, leathery trunks of the Alachine. The pass led along the leafy floor of the arching forest and up the mountain's less steep northern face. Around the base of the mountain, the soil gradually became more rocky, and the Alachine grew less in number. The mountain rose abruptly to reach its pinnacle, the rocky contour perilous to traverse. Caverns and tunnels were numerous, as were the creatures that inhabited the dark, unknown recesses within.